Welcome, demigods.
We've been expecting you. This is Ranking Rick Riordan, a podcast about Percy Jackson and the whole wide rest of the Riordanverse. I'm Dan.
I'm Olga.
And today we are talking, after 3 years of anticipation, about the season premiere of many, many seasons of Percy Jackson on Disney+. Episodes 1 and 2.
Percy Jackson is here with Grover, Annabeth, Luke,
and the whole gang.
Yeah.
A gang of monsters. All right, so we're going to get into our thoughts. I just want to quickly explain how we're going to cover this show. If you haven't seen us before, we do a general Percy Jackson podcast. We've ranked all of the books, all the heroes, all the gods, all that stuff. What we're going to do for this show, at least our first thought of what we're going to do on the show, it might evolve, is right after we watch episodes, we're going to sit down here, me and Olga, record our first impressions, our first reactions. What do we think after just having watched it? Probably going to be on the shortish side. I don't know. We'll find out how long this video is. But the idea is then a few days later, we'll rewatch. We'll have reread that part of the book corresponding with those episodes. And we're going to meet up with Clara, our third co-host, and do a full-length podcast where we recap the whole episode, go in more detail, talk about differences from the books. And that is aiming to be out Mondays before the next episode. This Monday is Christmas, so it'll probably be out Tuesday. But if you want to keep up with our plans, you can do so at Ranking Riordan on Twitter.
You know what we're talking about, yeah. Also, you can subscribe here at Doing Okay or on various podcast platforms.
All right. Now the nonsense is out of the way.
Yes.
What did you think?
I mean, it was great.
Yeah.
I was sitting there with a grin on my face. I couldn't believe that we were watching it, and it felt right.
Yeah.
Like, that's, you know, we're going to get into some of the nuances of things that were more right versus less right to us.
Yeah.
Obviously, our opinion, subjective, but I just couldn't believe that the pages were coming alive in the way that they were. And and the characters had the heart that really shines from Lightning Thief and the greater Percy Jackson and the Olympians series as a whole.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, the most important thing is that Percy is so Percy. The performance that Walker's doing is pitch perfect. I basically no notes. There might have been one line in the whole thing that I was like, meh. But like the
whatever.
Sarcasm, the emotion, he makes him so empathetic and like human in a way that I feel like is so easy to root for him. The monologues he has, the I want to say the writing for Percy's almost better than the book.
Honestly, it feels like an adaptation that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like what they're choosing to have him say and how he is embodying it just is so perfect.
Yeah.
They knocked it out of the park finding Walker.
And I'm someone who's like pretty picky about our chosen one boy protagonists. You know, I never really liked Daniel Radcliffe in Harry Potter. I despised Logan Lerman in the movies of Percy Jackson.
You heard it. If this is your first exposure to us as podcasters / reviewers of the Riordanverse, we do not like the Percy Jackson movie.
Yes.
So,
but also specifically, because I know there are people who don't like the movies but like Logan Lerman. Hate, absolutely despise. Never felt a modicum of the emotion that I felt from Walker here. And I think that grounds the show so well.
Yeah.
I have, on like a personal note, like I struggle watching this show. It's a roller coaster ride for me because of something that overall I would say is a positive, which is this is basically the best we could possibly have hoped for, right? Yeah. This is a very, very well done adaptation, but it's never going to be exactly what I personally wanted it to be. And that's what I struggle with, where I every new element that's shown, it's like, oh, that's not exactly like, it's close to what I pictured, but it's not really what I pictured. And I'm personally very scared of losing my original vision and it just being replaced by the TV show. I think that for certain things like Walker, I'm kind of okay with that because he's so good. But for other things, I'm like, I don't want to picture that Sally Jackson.
Yeah.
Maybe we could talk about her.
I just want to say before we do, that for me, because Percy Jackson as a whole, but especially the Lightning Thief, like has existed in my psyche for over a decade, well over a decade, actually, unfortunately, that I don't feel like I am in the place of it being replaced. I have my in-head canon / positioning of like playing with my dolls of the characters that has existed for so long and also has been reinforced by us doing the podcast. Yeah. Especially with the number of books we've read with him as a protagonist, that I don't think I'll start visualizing the characters as the actors. Yeah. So for me, these things are going to live side by side. And it's going to be more about the success of taking what's on the page and making it a visual form and using the constraints of reality. And like, CGI is always, and a TV budget, even though it's like a Disney Plus, like highly anticipated show, like that will always have the clunkiness.
The monsters are never going to replace the monsters in my brain. Exactly. I'll say that much.
Exactly. Yeah. Because it's just going to be a computer making them. And
literally as far back as 2009, I remember talking to Clara, our other co-host, and being like, the only adaptation that should happen is an animated one. And that's because of the monsters mainly was what I was thinking about at the time. But I will say also, I think something I said to you and Clara off podcast is I'm a very, very visual person. I have a degree in film studies. I work in editing as a profession. So when I read a book, I see it already as an adaptation and I see the camera angles. And I think that is why every shot I'm like, that's not exactly what I thought Camp Half-Blood would look like, but that's all on me.
Yeah.
So I fully recognize that.
This is going to be from our various like scopes and backgrounds, and people are going to relate to that as much as they will, you know, but let's get into it. So we've been very positive.
Yeah. And we will be more.
However,
Sally
Jackson.
Yeah.
A positive. I feel like the actress has a maternal vibe. Yeah. I do think that there are certain I could see her sort of looking like Walker. Like I could see sort of that a choice there of visual like casting. I do not feel like she is performing for a TV show, for a camera.
It feels very theatrical.
Yeah, that's what we paused the premiere and we were like, what isn't working for us? And we were like, it feels like she is line reading to the back of the room. Like there's a grandiosity to her like pauses and like lecturing him.
You know what it's also could be? I definitely agree with the theater thing. It also feels like she's talking to the children watching in a way. Like it feels more like a kid's show when she's speaking than when anybody else is speaking.
Yeah.
And obviously she's talking to her son, so that sort of makes sense. And
it worked better when we saw 7-year-old Percy, I think, than when we see 12-year-old current Percy.
Yeah, I just don't. They gave her a lot more dialogue than she has in the book. I mean, there's a lot of exposition that has to be expised.
How's that filmmaking degree, Dan?
So I get it. And, and I think it's also to like really reinforce their connection and make the fact that she is the main goal throughout the book.
The payoff in episode 2 onto 1 and him losing her.
Yeah. But yeah, I really, she was from the first episode, she was my only real main struggle. I think Grover was fantastic. I think Chiron is fantastic. I think Grover's better than book Grover.
I love Grover.
Yeah.
I struggled with the character of Grover even when I was younger reading it. I just like didn't vibe with the humor they gave him and like his attitude. The sweetness of Grover and his like dedication to Percy and doing right by Percy is like picture perfect. Like truly like it again, it's taking what was on the page but making it better.
Yeah. I think he's really good. And I think that Chiron is just, he basically is exactly what he needed to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that focusing so heavily on Sally in the first episode definitely was a detriment to me. I think we should also talk about Gabe, who I thought was interesting because I thought his humor really worked. And in general, I want to say, I think the humor in the show has worked basically every single time. Like there has been no joke that fell flat for me.
No.
Which is very impressive.
Yeah. I really liked the banter that Percy had with Gabe because, you know, Percy had gone through something fairly traumatic just in the scenes prior and us setting up him feeling like the odd one out. So to me, this really was the first like humorous part of the episode. And it shows his personality. And I think that it also sets up Gabe's arc nicely for what we know he'll be doing in the background in like future adventures as the quest progresses. So I overall kind of like the fact that he was less overtly mean because I think that
I would say he was mean. He just wasn't abusive, which is what the character was in the books.
Yeah. I feel like Percy was more like cowed by him and just more eye-rolly from what I remember. I mean, we will confirm this once we reread the portion of the book and do the rewatch, but it was nice to see them actually like sparring a little bit in terms of attitude.
Yeah. So Gabe is really interesting to me. He's, I would say, one of the most adapted pieces that we have, right? Because I like him within the context of the show. And I'm okay with things like, oh, he's an online poker player. I think getting rid of the other characters in the room is probably smart, making it focus more on Gabe and Percy's interactions. And like I said, I think the humor worked. I think the actors picked perfect for the role they wrote here.
Yeah, sorry, you do well being a slime ball. Congratulations.
But I do think it's interesting and a little bit worrying to me that they're taking the bite out of his relationship with both Percy and Sally in that he doesn't have the threatening air. It is a story about an abusive parent and an abusive husband in the books. And I can see Disney being like, maybe let's tone this back. Maybe even Rick was like, hey, I don't want to go this far anymore.
It could also be about making Sally less her self-sacrifice being more with the Minotaur than it is just with the relationship with Gabe.
I personally take issue with. That's honestly my biggest reason I have an issue with changing Gabe is because it cuts out her arc. She has a very clear story of her own going on in this book that also is very core to who she is throughout the rest of the series, and that she overcame that. I don't like when she had her interaction with Gabe where they fought over the sandwich thing. Funny, legitimately funny. She seemed like it made me like her less. She seemed like she was already talking down to him, and she seemed like she would be good in a relationship with him. I thought that like the fact that they were like talking about the Knicks the same way, that they both like the sandwiches. Yeah, she's like talking down to him, is like making him say please, but like that just seems like any slimeball couple, you know, and anything.
It seems like a couple that is just, we bicker and we probably shouldn't be together, but we've developed a balance in things, especially. Yeah, it's just very different and makes me think that's just maybe not the story they wanted to tell. They really just wanted to focus more on Percy's relationship with his mom from a sense of like, she's the parent who stuck around and I resent my dad for not not being there and abandoning her or abandoning me.
Yeah.
But I agree with you that, like, for better or worse, her overcoming the abusive relationship and her shining and believing in herself and, like, going on to have such a successful relationship in the future, it's just, like, a different story being told.
Yeah,
and
and
it loses something.
I think it loses a significant something for me. I think it is one of the things that made the book not just a kid's book. I think it's something that when we originally reviewed Lightning Thief, people wrote in and said how much they connected with this part of the storyline and with his parent, his stepdad being so awful. So I'm not going to keep harping on it. I will say one thing I do like as far as adaptations that I thought didn't like at first, but as the episode went on, I was like, you know what? Right choice. The scene with Mrs. Dodds. The fact that they cut back on it so much didn't really make it a fight. So he didn't really know about, like, the sword for real. I was, like, bummed at first because I was like, I want to see that fight. But
because it's, like, the first thing we see in the book.
Yeah,
really.
It's like the first thing you want to see adapted is them fight. But cutting that back, making it so that it really stuck about, like, is he crazy? Which obviously we know he isn't, but, like, it making more sense that he would still feel crazy. I think they really built that up really well, and the emotion around him being confused by nobody else understanding it. And then I think the fact that it all builds to the Minotaur fight and that being the action set piece at the end of the first episode, I think that was really smart.
Yeah.
And I think that Mrs. Dodds looked awesome.
I agree.
Yeah.
They did a great job. I look forward to seeing her again. We saw that in a little bit of a preview as well.
Yeah.
So I think that they're doing a good job so far overall, again, with, like, the monsters and the creatures. They're working their way around them as best they can.
Yep.
There's a few awkward shots with, like, Chiron, but overall doing the camera angle in episode 2, especially of him being, like, over Percy. Like, you feel the height difference of him being a centaur and him being a 12-year-old boy.
I don't think the Minotaur was perfect, but he was as good as I could ask for a TV show, honestly.
And I think that it worked overall well, even though for us it was a little bit hard to see. We were watching in daytime, so maybe the backlighting of our living room made it a little harder to see in the night. But, like, you have to do that in the dark and choose how. I mean, it happens at night even in the book. But my point being, like, the way they desaturated it and used the lightning to, like, show it off, I think it made sense for
and I think it was
being
a
CGI.
well-crafted action sequence.
Yes.
I think they did a good job with it.
Yeah.
While we're talking about, like, visuals and stuff, I will say there are definitely a few times where I'm like, okay, they're in the volume here. There were a couple shots, I think, in the cabin when Luke and Percy were talking that I was like, they're not in the same space. Why isn't this over one of the other person's shoulders? It seemed like one of them was acting to maybe, like, a script reader, and then the other one was acting. It wasn't like the entire time. I'm very picky about these things.
Do you want to take a step back and explain what the volume is for anyone who might not know?
So, I mean, I don't know. And the thing is, I don't know which shots were shot in the volume and which weren't. Because I know that they definitely filmed some of the camp stuff on a set.
Yeah.
In a
Say what the volume is.
The volume, okay. People know what the volume is by now. It's basically Disney Plus sort of pioneered this technology where you're, instead of a green screen where you're just in front of a green screen
that has the image added after in post.
They add in post. The volume is a space that has these screens on it that project the image that you would end up green screening as it's happening, so the actors can feel like they're in the space
more immersively
and try to light it like it will be actually lit in that space and all that stuff. And sometimes it's awesome and sometimes it's less awesome. But I'm being picky there. But episode 2, some other, like, things
I didn't notice, but I'll probably look for it on rewatch annoyingly. So thank you, Daniel. Episode 2, I like camp. It works, like, as a setting that I've spent so much time picturing for them. I really like the various areas. I like the pavilion. I like Mr. D's patio.
That's that's the highlight for me. Honestly, I am at, like, 70% there with the camp. I like it. Don't love it. I wish we had had a few more sweeping aerial shots. I wish we had. I mean, it's always complicated too because he comes out of the big house and he's talking to him. So it's not like he's like walking into camp and having, but like I really wanted more of that grandeur. But I loved his talk with Mr. D, the way they sort of changed some things up there, added more humor.
So good. I think you were worried about Jason Mantzoukas as Mr. D, and I thought he did a great job. He felt grounded. He wasn't like too big in his comedy. So
yeah, I think they did a good job with him. Again, 75% there for me. But he's good. He's
whatever,
good.
Daniel.
He's
whatever.
Good. He's just not exactly right, but he's good. He's doing a good job.
I do not endorse.
You know what? Okay.
Dan's words.
Luke, 100%
Luke,
there for me.
So good.
Yes.
I'm really happy with Luke. I love his relationship with Percy and him starting to look up to him and he calls him his friend and like believes that Percy calls Luke his friend.
Yeah.
And Clarice doing a good job bullying Percy.
75% there.
I mean, that was such a big part of episode 2. So what do you feel like isn't working for you?
It's such a hard thing to nail down. I think the actress is doing a very good job of being the character she's being told to be. I just don't completely feel like that character is Clarice. She's doing a good job being intimidating and being a bully, which
she feels like a child of Aries to me.
Yeah, I guess there's something, she just has more of a genericness to her. And maybe once I reread that part of the book, I'll be like, oh, well, Clarice only became more of Clarice as the books went on.
I feel like Sea of Monsters is really more of a Clarice, like...
I mean, I think she got the intimidation thing down. I think that the spear was awesome and the combat all worked really well.
They're drawing blood on Percy there. I appreciated that. Yeah.
We've talked about wishing that her physicality was different, that she was more of a bigger, buffer actress that they had picked for the character. That is significant to me, especially with that character being such a unique body type.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's not anything against Dior. It's but it's more again the like dissonance of what's on the page. What have we been picturing versus what we see? I
did like that as far as like the writing goes, and I think what they were also trying to inject in the character, the focus on you're a fake kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like when she goes, I don't actually want to maim you. I just want you to admit that you're a fake. I thought that gave her more nuance. Yeah.
It really goes back to the glory and the fame thing that Luke is emphasizing to Percy, and that Percy himself then starts to pursue in order to have his like attention from his godly parent.
Yeah. I'd also say the best scene in the episode was a totally brand new one, which was the prayer to Sally. Again, Walker just knocking it out of the park.
That was like, I was sitting there feeling chills with him sacrificing his blue jelly beans. And again, for book readers, like, you know what the blue jelly beans are. And here it's just enough to be like, they're from his mom. She knows he loves them. He's sacrificing them. And it sets up Percy's arc for what he gives to other demigods and has the gods grant him at the end.
Well,
so all of this like is just it's all there. All of his like love for his mom, his resentment for how the gods treat their kids, like all of it is there. It's a good
microcosm of the hurt, the anger about his dad, the loss. Feel like we really don't get enough of the loss, I feel like, in the book. And I also and even some humor I feel like was thrown in there. But I love that he's like, I'm gonna make him pay attention. Like, you see the like strength too. It's not just the hurt or the anger. There's a heroic quality.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's there.
Yeah, a defiance. I think.
So, notable character we have not talked about yet is Annabeth.
Yep.
And this is just the beginning of her relationship to Percy. They're setting things up nicely with them being, not adversarial, but they don't exactly like each other.
Antagonistic.
Yeah, there we go. She's using him, she's observing him, and he doesn't like it.
Yeah.
So I will admit, this is the part of Lightning Thief that I don't super remember well.
Yeah.
Like, to me, I really imprinted on once they get over not getting along and how everything moves forward afterward.
Yeah.
Yes. But so I don't really remember how this goes.
The level of antagonism in the book.
Exactly.
Point, yeah.
We'll talk more about that, I think.
Yeah, I don't remember if she pushes him in the water. If she doesn't, I thought that was a great addition.
Mm-hmm.
She says she's sorry, but like she knows, and it heals him. I thought that was great.
Yeah.
And the claiming and all that was really
She
well
already
done.
suspected it.
Yeah.
She's watching. She's not looping anyone explicitly into what she's thinking. You know, it really, this isn't her episode to shine yet, but it's like building to there.
I think that's a great thing because they told us a lot, right, about her. But that was the moment where it was show, don't tell. Oh, she's smart. She knows what she's doing.
Yeah.
I also did like a lot of the humor of the interplay between them with her going invisible and all that. And also his little sequence of like playing with the lizard or whatever.
His little like boredom of like of Luke being like, I trust Annabeth. She knows what she's doing with Percy. And then the way it just very humorously cut to him zoning out, peeing in the woods, playing with the lizard, taking a nap. Like it really showed the like the playfulness of Percy, but also the methodicalness of Annabeth, even in her absence.
Yeah.
I think the second episode was really more about Luke and Clarice.
Yeah.
And obviously Percy and Grover, for that matter, too, with the like council and his machinations in the background and not wanting to hurt Percy. Like, then it was about Annabeth. So not too much more to say about.
Jury's still out about Annabeth. I think she did good with what she was given. I don't know how I feel about her overall. I feel like I need to see the camaraderie more. And then I'll have a fuller opinion. I didn't love that they randomly added things like she's the strongest warrior in the camp and she's the head counselor already at 12. And I guess didn't seem necessary.
It was a little bit too much of that tell versus show that I think that they were setting up here.
And it's also like Annabeth isn't like the best warrior. That's like kind of antithetical to who she is. Like she's the best strategist. Yeah, they said she's the best fighter in the camp.
Right.
Warrior,
I was saying like, no, they introduced her as a child of Athena. I think that it would have been nice to like explain more for what that meant. So like what we know Athena campers and children of Athena to be is not being exactly explained yet.
Yeah, I mean, there's a very clear, like, she fights with a knife and is strategic and outwits her opponents. Mm-hmm. Like, I feel like that is a different thing than what it felt like Luke was setting up.
Even though he was saying Annabeth had it. To me, the problem is what we heard him say and what we actually see her doing aren't in agreement. Yeah. She is the tactician. He was the fighter.
Yeah.
That is what was on the book. So for him to be like, she's the best fighter, it was like, oh.
I'm also, it just kind of reminds me of the Sally stuff where I'm like, let the character have room to grow. Like, why does she have to start off like at the best possible place? But
Well, Percy is head of the Poseidon cabin, so he also doesn't have much room to.
Very true.
To grow
Very
upward.
True. Great point, dear.
I mean, again, we love Annabeth on the page. Yeah. I feel like she is bringing in her performance so far the like. Stalking Percy and him not liking that. Yeah. So I know that there is room for their relationship to grow.
She has a good snark to her.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. The only last thing I wanted to mention is I think it's interesting, given the fact that they have as much exposition as they do, which is a lot, and it might be, it's interesting because, like, we are usually pretty heavily critical of whatever we're talking about. It's very hard for me to critique this show as anything other than how it adapts the original material. I can't really tell, is this too much exposition? What would I feel like if I didn't know any of this going in? But one thing I did feel like was lacking exposition-wise is the gods. Mm-hmm. Like, I feel like if I showed this to my niece, who I'd love to show this to, and I think she'd really connect with Percy in a lot of ways, that would be great. She doesn't really know the Greek gods, and I don't know that this show's so far doing a great job of explaining them. Mm-hmm. They're just like, oh, she's a daughter of Ares.
Yeah.
And they like, like, I know obviously it's from the book too, where they're like, oh, Poseidon, Earthshaker, whatever, blah, blah. And I'm like, say he's the god of the sea. Like, like, make it clear who he is. They say Zeus without really going into more detail about him being the sky and the lightning. They, I forget who else they mentioned. Oh, even like Dionysus, he doesn't call him wine dude.
Yeah.
I'm like, come on, give me a little bit. Like, we need a Pokedex entry and one of these characters are introduced. And I know I don't, but I do feel like, I don't know, it would, even if there was like a short 5-minute thing at the end of each episode that like, be like, let's talk about the real stories of these things, like something. I don't know. Like, I don't know. It just, it felt
a little rushed in that regard. I mean, the thing is that I think part of the problem of that, and I do agree with you. I agree with this criticism of being like, wait, they don't explain who Athena is, but you're saying she's head of Athena Academy.
Yeah, that's a great. But I didn't think of Athena
what does
either.
this mean for her? Yeah. So again, you might think like, oh, she's also a fighter. It's like, no, they're smarty. Yeah. But basically, the problem is that Percy knows more in this show than he even does in the books. Yeah. And I mean,
which
Sally's
is a weird choice.
Sally's still like, the idea being like, Sally tells him about like gods and monsters and all of this. It's like, but he's supposed to be reminded more by the people around him. And you as a reader are introduced / explicitly having them explain to you.
That's like pretty core, I feel like, to the series, is that he doesn't know that much. And so especially Annabeth has to explain things to him, and therefore from that the audience learns things. Like if he can just figure out who Medusa is on his own, that like is a huge change.
I'm going to reserve quite, like, we'll see what happens with that and with the monsters, but yeah, I mean, Annabeth is really supposed to be more of his gateway into knowing what's going on.
And therefore a child's gateway.
Correct.
Yeah.
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 Or a young viewer who hasn't learned this in school yet or learned it out of their own curiosity. Or even just someone
who, like, if we weren't as into this as we were, sure, we'd remember Zeus or whatever, but would he necessarily remember what Hermes is other than the messenger god?
Should we ask your sister?
Well, like, quiz her?
Yeah.
Yeah, we should.
Yeah.
I don't think she would have very good answers.
She's not much older than us, and she didn't learn, like, she learned it in school, but never read these books.
I would be shocked if she knew who Dionysus was. So
we'll get back to you guys. It's Christmas this weekend, so I guess we know what we're talking about.
All right, guys. I think we're going to end up there because we already went on longer than I expected.
I knew we were going to be verbose. I mean, it was 2 episodes.
We're going to have to force Clara to listen to this so that we're not as repetitive as we could be.
Correct.
All right. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll be back with a podcast. I'll figure it. I don't know if the podcast is going to be a video or not. Even if it's just audio only, it will show up on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/doingok, and podcast services, Apple, Spotify, the like. Let us know what you thought about the episodes in the comments down below. Rate us, review us on those platforms, and may the gods be ever in your favor.
Bye-bye.